Okay, the information that we are getting is principally informational. We are still not at a decision point on the budget. All school board members have had an opportunity to have a 2x2 briefing. People are still getting updated. There will be another opportunity, a long opportunity, probably at the work session on December 10th, to firm up. We should have more information at that time on revenues mid-year and all the rest, and any other smaller issues that board members may be interested in. The superintendent will be finalizing his budget proposal by the end of December, and obviously he would appreciate as much information and input from board members. Clearly he will be presenting the budget in January, and then we have public hearings. And the school board will have an opportunity to amend the superintendent's proposed budget when we do our voting in February. So we are still in the thought process as we are trying to give our input to the superintendent. So Dr. Brabrand, do you want to jump in here?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Strauss. Just a couple of quick things before Marty and Lee take over. This is really the second phase. We brought you the preliminary budget update right at the beginning of the year. We're trying to flesh out some more details for you to be able to look at things like contractual increases, to be able to see what those specifics are. You'll see a couple of things that change, where like a work session FCPS on, we got clear direction, and we've redone the financing around that based on what was decided. There are a couple of things that I, working with my staff, feel are important to begin to move forward in the budget process, and you'll see a couple of those around AVID and academy staffing. We talked about those last year, and those are things that are important to me. Obviously, the board will be the final decider, and I just want to reiterate, we have done the 2x2s. We're pulling together all that information, and Tammy and Janie are getting it so that you all can they'll be working with you to help coalesce what are some of the key priorities aligned with our strategic plan that the board wants to see moving forward in this budget. This is still a work in progress. We'll have another update in December prior to me presenting in January. But we want to, just like everything else, it's better to over communicate, do a back and forth instead of feeling like, whoa, what's this? I don't remember that. And honestly, things change in the budget, as Lee knows, from month to month, week to week. Something comes up we didn't know about a week or a month before, and we're trying to stay closely in communication with you all, and we'll be glad to do the presentation and take any questions.
And Ms. Corbett-Sanders, target end date, target time, end for this morning. What time do you want us to be finished with this? At 1? Okay, well, colleagues, we will try to be very efficient. Okay, Mr. Smith, you'd like to tee this up?
Sure, certainly. Thank you very much, Ms. Strauss. So yes, we're going to do another high-level look at the fiscal forecast, sort of in prep for the full budget presentation in January. This is also an opportunity for you to see the numbers that we're going to include in the joint presentation that we're going to do with the Board of Supervisors at the end of the month. I believe it's November 27th is the date for that meeting. One thing that we will do, and we've done this in the past because of the time crunch in between this presentation and that particular presentation, before we actually post that presentation, we will provide that via posting the Brabrand briefing for the board so that they get a sense of the information that we're going to share. And essentially, we're going to be putting these numbers into that presentation to identify the gap that we have.
One last thing just for the board to know, we already have scheduled on the calendar we have the mid-year budget review for FY19, and I think that's when in December we can do that with the final look at what we would be building in FY20.
And I think that we could also have that conversation, Dr. Brabrand, that you can have with the chair and vice chair about meetings coming up in December to perhaps shift some of the time so that we can spend more time on the budget, and so we can have that conversation.
Yes, we hope that December 10th, or Ms. Corbett-Sanders, if you have any other hold dates, but we will need one more good long discussion of what we're doing.
And we currently have BA lanes and subs on that day, and there may be a way for us to have that discussion about extending to talk a little more about budget. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Burden, and she will go through the document we have here, and then we'll be available for questions. We do have our staff members available here if there are any additional questions. And so, Ms. Burden.
Good afternoon. Basically, this is the same spreadsheet that you saw at the September fiscal forecast, but it's been updated based on better information that we have available. The items that are highlighted in green are items that we're still expecting to change, but don't have information yet on that. And the items in yellow are the items that have been changed. So you can see that there's been no change to our assumptions for the beginning balance. The county transfer, we assumed a 3% increase. Each 1% is about 20.5 million. State aid, these are the numbers that were adopted by the General Assembly and the governor last spring for fiscal 20, but those numbers will most certainly be updated with the governor's introduced budget on December 18th. As far as the federal funding goes, we now are aware of an IDEA increase that we'll see. Previously, we hadn't projected any increase in federal funding. City of Fairfax remained the same. Other revenue, we've included FCPS on funding that parents will pay. Recall that's a $50 charge for high school students, $25 if you are eligible for reduced meals, and no charge if you are eligible for free meals. So the total revenue adjustments total about $83.6 million. The next section is required expenditure adjustments. Enrollment and demographic adjustments still maintains what was included in the CIP document last fall for fiscal 20, or an increase of 514 students. So that's about 5.7 million. That number remains the same. The enrollment projections are still being analyzed. We will not have a number likely by the joint meeting, so this will still remain our placeholder in that, but this number will most certainly change by the superintendent's proposed budget, because we'll have a better handle on that. Employee benefits and recurring salaries, that number changed slightly. We had a change communicated to us from the county of the rates for FCERS, and so that rate went up slightly from what we had assumed in the September fiscal forecast. And so that number increased as a result of that.
And that's the employee share.
Employer share.
Employer share, thank you.
Yes. The logistics number is made up of, the other employee benefits didn't change. We're still doing a 2% healthcare increase, which is excellent compared to national averages of about 7%. VRS is not, does not have a rate change in fiscal 20. And we do have a slight change in the ERFC rate as well. So that's what makes up all of that. On the logistics, the total is 8.7 million. Compared to 9.3 million that we had in September, and that is solely due to the move of a $600,000 line item that we had as a contractual increase for the online campus, and we moved it down to instructional resources. It really is more of an instructional resource than it is a contractual increase, so we made that correction. So you now see that on line 49, and so we removed it from here. That is the only change in the logistics as far as the dollars go, but we did include more detail so you would know what those contractual increases might be. Like, for example, the departmental increase for HR is for maintenance of Lawson, which is our HR system. The contractual increases for DIT, again, that number's the same. That's for the products that you see to the right, and anticipated and unanticipated increases in those. Department of Student Services stayed the same. We have contracts for nurses, speech language, interpreters, and psychologists. And this is the increases that are expected in those contracts. The instructional services, all that remains there after moving the online academy was the VPI Plus grant that was reduced. And the reason that appears here is we apparently agreed that we would fill in the gap for that VPI grant once the funding got reduced. We knew about that ahead of time, so that is a contractual increase. And then the Department of Facilities and Transportation also remained the same, but again, more detail. This is recurring radio replacement costs, the Sonova MDT, about a couple $100,000 in buses. The custodial and maintenance costs are increasing. And then previously, we didn't have a lease for Willow Oaks. Well, we had a lease, but we didn't have a dollar amount that we had to pay. And now we do, and that needs to be included in the fiscal 20 budget. The next section is salary and FTE increases. These numbers remain the same except for line 34, which is BA Lane salary scales placeholder. That number has come down slightly. We changed one of our assumptions to be more in line with other data, and that actually reduced the cost by about $400,000. Other salary increases total $2.3 million. We've included detail there as well. The substitute rate increase placeholder did not change. That's still about $1 million. Bonus for the top of the scale, we're doing a 1% bonus placeholder for employees that don't receive a compensation increase. This would be the third year that we would do that. And to me, if we know about something and it's something that we're doing every year, then we should just go ahead and include it in the budget instead of trying to find money after the fact. Parent liaison.
Can I say something to that,
Sure.
Lee? That is a theme of what you're going to see here today. Stuff that we were doing at the end and trying to catch at the end, we're trying to show to the board and really to everyone up front. Now, that's a board decision about whether we want to handle business at the end or at the beginning, but we've sort of felt like as staff, for transparency's sake and for understanding of the board and coming at the beginning of a budget process as opposed to the end. Now, the board could say, you know what? We know about it now. We appreciate the transparency. We still want to deal with this at the end. And that can be direction given to from you all to me, to staff. But you're seeing a little bit more of stuff that we historically may have done at the end here at the beginning for the board's review and thought.
Okay. The parent liaison, we've included the next phase of that. Recall that in fiscal 19, I think we provided full benefits to parent liaisons working 25 to 29 hours. This is the next phase of that. Those working from 20 to 24 hours. That number did not change. The living wage number did change slightly. Right now, we're at $14.50. The county's at $14.83. This assumes that we would move to the county's living wage number of $14.83. And then there's base savings of $37.7 million. That number didn't change either. And so the total of salary and FTE increases, oh, I skipped over staffing standards placeholder, which is $6 million. That's a placeholder that we've had in since the beginning, and refers to the review of the staffing standards that we're beginning in fiscal 20, as well as any strategic initiatives that might be approved, because of course most of those would require some staffing. So we still have that placeholder maintained. Strategic plan investments in transfers. There's the FCPS on placeholder. That number was $5.8 million. It's now $4.3 because we updated that based on implementation at the high school only. Again, we've provided more detail as to what those instructional resources are. The learning management system is $1 million increase, and that's basically Blackboard. Textbooks is about $600,000. That number did not change. And then some other instructional resources that we think are important is $95,000 for expansion of playgroups and EDI. The online campus that I said was moved from contractual increases on line 27 down to line 49. There is also come to our attention very recently the fact that we need to replace an assessment database. Apparently, we have a homegrown system that we have been using. It basically is a system that assists the high schools, I think just the high schools, maybe middle schools too, with test scheduling, test accommodations, those sorts of things. It's not centrally controlled currently, and it needs to be centrally controlled. And so that is an increase that's been estimated and we have included as part of the instructional resources. The AVID program, this assumes a slight expansion of that program to 2 secondaries and 1 elementary for a 3-year phase-in at a cost of $87,000 for this first year. The academy, this includes 5 additional positions, also a 3-year phase-in for those programs, and then transfers to other funds, which didn't change, but we've provided more detail. The ACE program is expected to need additional funding. Again, that's been a historical end-of-year transfer. That number's now been calculated at about $740,000 for fiscal 20, and FCPS is $739,000, and then construction equipment actually has gone down a little bit, and so the net of the transfers is about $1.2 million. So that in summary, if you look at all of this in total, including the textbook reserve, which kind of falls outside of the school operating fund, it totals about $118.2 million, leaving a gap of about $34.5 million.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Moon, Ms. Hines, Ms. Schultz, Ms. McLaughlin. The other suggestion that I have is that it is our tradition that we always ask budget questions formally, because that captures it as part of both the public document and the historical document for school board members. So while we always want to have next steps, I also want to make sure that if there are formal budget questions, that we ask them, so that for transparency and historical record keeping, it is unusually important for us to do that at budget time.
Sorry, for clarity, you mean at the table, I think we have sometimes added formal budget questions from the work session.
Yes.
So you are recommending.
Yes, absolutely, in advance. So when we go to next steps, if it appears to be a budget question, I want it also to be captured as a budget question.
Thank you.
You can ask it now, but then it will be recorded as the next step and a budget question, because it's very important that we capture everybody's thinking and need for specific information. I don't want to lose any of that, okay? Yes, proactive and transparent. Mr. Moon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Strauss. Just for clarification purposes, for AVID and Academy, when you had a 3-year phase-in and first-year cost for AVID, $87,000, does that mean we are expecting next year and the year following the similar amount of additional expenditure? Is that?
No, I don't believe so. For
Okay.
the AVID program, I believe that funding level needs to go up in fiscal 21 and fiscal 22. Do you want to know how much?
While she's answering that, let me just share, part of AVID and Academy are really around our strategic plan and access, opportunity, and achievement gaps. AVID is a program that has been talked about at the board table. It was talked about at our leadership conference by Pedro Noguera as a real equity program. We don't have it in all of our high schools.
So,
We don't. So this is, I know she's getting the numbers. So this is the part of trying to begin to go wider and deeper with AVID. And the Academy, you all discussed at the board table last year, and I feel very important about this. World languages, workforce development has been an issue that you've heard the state superintendents talking about. Our Academy staffing has been flat for 10 years, and this is wanting to start to reignite and put forward some momentum around staffing for those programs, including some world languages has been in that Academy staffing as well.
So again, the question, Mr. Moon, is the funding for AVID and the Academy, the amounts that we are seeing, we would expect those amounts
whether
to be
we are
repeated
expecting the
again.
same amounts of additional expenditures in the following 2 years, or is going to, I think you were saying that
Yes.
It's going to be a different amount.
Yeah, well, at least for Avid it is. In Avid, the fiscal '21 proposal right now shows an increase of 143,500.
Okay?
And then in fiscal '22, 216,500.
So with all, if he put all those money in for the next 2 years, or next 3 years, basically, how many positions are we talking about then?
I don't.
Those costs,
Sloan?
Mr. Moon, if I could
Yes.
just add a little bit of detail. Those costs for Avid largely are in staffing and the numbers of tutors. But they also include expenses like program fees that we pay to
Consider
Avid,
that then, please
professional
consider that as a
development
budget
fees.
question then. Please consider that as a budget question.
And then, Mr. Moon, I'm going to ask that as a follow-up, that you word carefully your budget question to make sure that it is complete as to the information, because these are two important clarifications.
Okay, thank you. And for the academy positions, because I see specific number of positions for the academy right there, 5 positions, is that 5 positions for the next year with that?
I'm sorry, I think the total is actually 14.5, but it's about $500,000 each year for the next.
Okay, so that's similar amount
Yes.
each year. Okay, thank you.
Again, Mr. Moon, if you'll ask both of those questions as a budget question?
I think I had those numbers before. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay,
to
but
clarify.
those are important clarifications, because
Thank
we'll
you.
get the same questions from the
Thank you.
community. Thank you. Ms. Hines?
Yeah, so as long as we're talking about the academy, I want to make sure that I understand and the community understands what we mean when we say academy. So we're talking about all those programs like culinary arts, med tech, auto tech, all the things that are under the academy umbrella. Okay, so adding these roughly 14 and a half positions over the next 3 years, is that what we're talking about? What is that to expand access to academy programs for our students?
Let Sloan talk about it, but we're currently not able to accommodate all of the kids that want to do these academy classes. We have world-class programs, and not all kids can access them. I don't know, Sloan, do you want to speak a little bit more to that?
Just a little bit more. Over the last 5 years, we've seen about a 60% increase in the number of students requesting to enroll in academies, and we have had a 0% increase in the amount of dedicated staffing resources to academy. So this, again, in line with our college and career readiness opportunities, would be a way to get additional capacity for more students to access more of the coursework in those programs that you mentioned. Also trade and industrial, JROTC, or other programs.
Great, that's wonderful. We have needed to do that for a while, we really have. So I'm glad we're taking the opportunity to do that. Another question I had, when we get to staffing standards review, let's see if I can find where that is. It's also on slide 7. The staffing standards review placeholder of $6 million. I just want to, I want to know if we can talk a little bit about how that is related to class size, if it is, because, you know, one of the things that I would like us, top of my wish list, is to walk back some of the increases in class size that we've made over the last 10 years, right? So can you explain sort of how the staffing standards review may affect class size?
Well, we're undergoing a staffing standards review, beginning with the elementary level. The board's goal is a class size of 26:1, and our divisor in the staffing standard is 27.25. So what we end up doing is allocating a large number of positions on the back end to accommodate that 26:1. So we're revamping that staffing standard for the superintendent's proposed budget so that we can hit the 26:1 maximum on the front end instead of the back end. So it's really more of an efficiency change than it is a cost savings, and it will require that we move some of the staffing reserve into general classroom teacher funding for elementaries, which is where it ends up being anyway. The staffing standards placeholder is there because of that staffing standards change. I mean, it's all about the distribution. Things can change when you start looking at the formula. Additionally, part of that formula includes needs-based staffing, which we want to make more transparent and pull that out as a discrete staffing standard so that principals and everybody know exactly what they're receiving for needs-based staffing. any strategic initiatives that might be approved generally require staffing, like world languages is one, I guess, that's been talked about. And so we need a funding source for those if the board is going to have any flexibility around that. And so this line item would cover that as well.
Okay, and I see that it's a placeholder, so it's still in flux, and we'll see what we end up with, right? But so the message about class size is that this doesn't actually change class size. What it does is allow principals to hire earlier in the year at the elementary level, right? So that they're not in August trying to backfill positions, right? Which is good news, it is. It's not as good news as if we were actually reducing class size, but yeah.
If I could share for you on that, Ms. Hines, may I? We have a placeholder of that this year. My long-term thinking, but subject to the board's review, is to increase the number in that staffing placeholder to have the board begin to say, what does it want to do as it looks at class size, as it looks at staffing formulas, as it looks at class size caps. A lot of our money this year remains with compensation to close the gap for our market-based compensation for teachers. But I wanted to begin in year 2 to sort of seed the thinking of the board around, we have some staffing issues that we have to review and we have to take a hard look at. $6 million's not a lot, really, when you start talking class size, which is tens of millions of dollars, but it's the begin to do a start. And I do want to applaud Lee for really digging through the formula numbers and going, we've really been dividing by a number that's not what our guideline is, and it makes people wait until the end of the hiring process instead of the beginning to staff your school. So we think it's going to be a win for principals, and really a win for efficiency, effectiveness. Give you the staffing based on the numbers that you have. Now, that could change when school starts, but we'll deal with that when the school year starts. Right now, we really haven't even distributed it based on the school's needs in the most effective manner.
Right, so it will have the effect of reducing our staffing reserve, right?
But
Okay.
Lee's done an analysis of that, and Lee, maybe why don't you share a little bit, tell the board when you did your analysis of the reserve, how it sort of broke down.
Well, I'm not sure what level of detail you want, but in general, there's about 450 positions in the fiscal 18 reserve. About 150 were allocated towards fluctuations in enrollment. 150 were allocated for staff, for class size to get those numbers down below 26-1, I think K3, and 27 at 4-6. And then another 150 were for special unique needs, those sorts of things. So we're looking to just transfer the 150 class size so that they're, again, allocated on the front end, and that's a win for principals primarily.
Okay, I mean, that helps, thank you. Well, my last question about this is just, we know that we've not only increased class size for elementary, but also middle and high, and it continues to be, I think one of the things that we really need to repair. If we could get a ballpark of, what it costs us, so the community knows, to reduce class size by 0.5 students, and we have raised class size by 0.5 3 times in the last 10 years, I think. So what does it cost to reduce class size by 0.5 students across the board?
Again, we're going to get a firm calculation on that, but the last time that we increased class size was in fiscal 18, and it was a half a student, and the cost savings were about $15 million. So you can see it's very expensive to try to decrease class size. You can do the math.
So just to clarify on this, we will be getting more detail on the analysis that you have worked on that would be sort of contained as to how you got to the $6 million placeholder?
No, it's just a placeholder.
Okay.
It's,
Okay. I guess I'm just asking,
Arbitrary.
since there will be more questions on the analysis that you have done in looking at the distribution of positions, because this will be an ongoing, as we know, ongoing question from the community is class size distribution, all the staffing. So I guess I'm asking, as we ask budget questions, what's going to come to us without asking a budget question at this point? So will there be more clarification of what you all are looking at?
We can provide additional clarification on the process that Ms. Burden just spoke about on how we're going to reallocate some of those reserve positions. We've provided some of that, but we can provide an update to the board as part of a budget question to do that.
Okay, great. That's what I'm getting at, to make sure we get the best information. Yes, and if we can get that in time for the December 10th work session. Yes, okay, great, thank you. All right, I have Ms. Schultz.
Let me start with my favorite. So, ACE, 740,000. How are we there? I thought we had gotten this down to like a few $100,000.
Well, we did. In fiscal 18, I think we actually ended up, it was less than 100,000 supplement that they needed. But the program is not self-sustaining. I think you may recall from the Auditor General's report that they did not believe that it could be self-sustaining based on their benchmarking and best practices of ACE programs throughout the United States. And as a result, we have taken a look at ACE, the changes that they made so that they got into compliance with their funding in fiscal 18 are not items that are sustainable. They held positions open longer than normal and that sort of thing. We have a new calculation of what it takes to run this program, and that requires a supplement of $740,000 from the school operating fund, which is up a little bit from what we have done historically, and certainly up from what was done in fiscal 18.
What is the minimum to meet the federal matching? What's the matching funds?
The only matching funds that were required is about $240,000 that matches a state federal grant for adult ESOL. And that's all we currently have in the budget that transfers to the ACE fund. Prior to the Great Recession, we had transferred upwards of over $1 million to cover the overhead costs. And when that had to be reduced as a budget cut, that's when we've had the sustainability issues in the ACE fund.
So I am not willing to continue to fund $500,000 when we have revisited this and revisited this and revisited this and told them they need to get their house in order. And, there are 500,000 reasons elsewhere in our K through 12, which is our primary mission, that we need to not be subsidizing adult education. If the county wants to do it through Parks and Rec, through their offerings, and if there's something that isn't being met, either through religious organizations that offer things like ESOL classes, through the county Parks and Recs offerings, through Northern Virginia Community College, or any of the other various and sundry opportunities to take continuing education classes, is not the mission of the Fairfax County Public Schools to underwrite to the tune of $500,000 additional education. And I'm at the point where I'm putting my foot down. We have done this. We have had this conversation. We have said, look at your offerings, ACE, and find out what, because they make money hand over fist on some of their classes, but they don't on others. And this is not our job, is to take taxpayer money that is intended for, K-12 and do an extension program for adult education that can and does have funding and means of access through other avenues.
May I respond on one
absolutely.
piece? This is my second year with you. ACE has been a subject of real debate among the board. I could have waited and done ACE at the end of the year and had the whole discussion then, or I could bring it to you now, which is what I've done. And the budget obviously is one of the school board's biggest responsibilities and sets direction. And I mean, I look forward to that direction. We've worked hard to try to lower the number. We got it down real low last year with a whole lot of hard work. It's up a little higher than I'd like it. But the board in the end I feel will direct us. And if we have it as it is, it'll stay as it is. If it's a lower number, we'll cut offerings of ACE. And I feel like in the end, this has been a program around for a long time, and we need to have that discussion at the board table to help inform what staff's next steps are.
Okay,
And
so
I felt like, I just want to say back for transparency, I'm not waiting till May and having the board go, oh my God, what is this? Here's the number now. We're in the beginning of November, and I felt the board would appreciate at least that transparency.
So
of
I
this.
just want to begin the conversation with my colleagues. I say this every year. You have 800 plus, and that's just who makes it onto the waiting list, never mind the ones who don't make it. You want to direct our resources to something that's within our mission lane. Whoever is 4 on a pre-K waiting list, it's 1 year. That $500,000, you want to have a conversation about directing $500,000, direct it to figuring out a way for us to deliver pre-K to 4-year-olds who will be on our doorstep the subsequent fall. But there's just a point where we are bleeding money out to ACE that can't be self-sustaining. And if there is an imperative, course offering that for some reason only through Fairfax County Public Schools adult education can be offered, then we do it with the $240,000 that we do as a matching. And you take the $500,000 and you go do something that's in our mission, and you tell the board of supervisors to offer that at a subsidized rate on the Park Authority side of the course offerings, or Northern Virginia Community College, or something else. So that's on that one. Number 2, can you explain where are the 5 positions for the academy going?
Sloan, you don't mind taking that one, do you?
No, I don't mind taking that one. So as I said, the student increase in terms of interest in taking academy courses has grown by over 60% in the last 5 years. The largest area of increase is really in health and medical. But again, in terms of the allocation of the 5 positions, we would look at the student enrollment interest this year and try to figure out how to disperse that 5 FTE as strategically as possible based on the majority of student interest. So probably a lot of it would go to health, medical. Some probably would go to some of the other programs.
So you don't have a specific mindset. You just say, we're going to grow the academy programs.
Well, the problem is we haven't grown the academy program at all in over 5 years in terms of staffing. So the level of student interest and demand exceeds our staffing levels in all of our lines.
Well, I just
of
found
programs.
$500,000 for you, so it's not a problem. So my question gets to sort of the equity issue, because we don't have academy programs at all of our high schools. And this becomes a real struggle in terms of students being able to sign up for them. It is, this mindset that if they're on a college preparatory path, that they can't, quote unquote, afford to explore academy programs because they have to give up the electives. Now, hopefully, when we have our discussion about graduation requirements and we unbundle some of those beyond state level requirements, we can have that vote and we'll free up maybe a couple of electives. But the placement of the academy programs, Dr. Braybrand, is a problem, because some students just simply don't and won't access them if they're not at their base school. And the ability for us to expand those offerings, and my advocacy is and remains in the cyber field, because that's where kids can get employment for the foreseeable future, and high-paying employment, that we look to expand at schools which do not currently have academy programs, academy-style courses, and that they, on an equity basis, get some of those positions first. That's why I'm asking, where are these positions? And if we don't know, I think that has to be part of the discussion.
Yeah, we haven't determined them at this early date. I will say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sloan, Francisco, way back, one of the things we could look at is some courses that are in such high demand, can we begin to extend them beyond the academy? Criminal justice was one of those programs years and years ago, and it became so popular that we started to embed it into some of our core offerings at schools, while still offering it as an academy. depending on where the location was. So nothing's off the table necessarily on this, but where I felt most strongly in talking with Sloan and Francisco and Francis was we have had these programs and 10 years of flat funding with 60% increase in interest. That, to me, I think we've got to start to have that conversation again around these very important programs. So
Okay,
the specifics, we
I
don't
agree,
have it yet.
I agree completely. I referenced my first item of ACE, which is we're not funding things that kids desperately want and can't take because we have not prioritized defunding subsidizing underwriting adult education and having that conversation with the Board of Supervisors that they pick up their side of it in terms of adult offerings. So that's an excellent point. The third question I have, what are play groups and EDI? What is that? I mean, I know it's only 95,000, but
EDI is the Early Development Instrument. It's something that we've partnered with the UCLA and the county to look at. Kindergarten teachers actually do an individual assessment on all their students to determine what type of early childhood experience they've had. The county has funded all of the costs for that, which is about $76,000 for us to do all of our schools. So the $10,000 request here is for our kindergarten teachers to have some sub monies to be able to spend the time to do that. Now, 95 includes also the expansion of play groups. So the EDI portion is only $10,000 from that line item. Play groups is something that we have offering right now for parents that don't have their children in early childhood programs, but they want to get some learning about what it might be and some of the best practices. So they bring them in and they have play groups to be able to learn some of those practices, take them back to their home. And so this would be expanding 10 more additional play groups. And this came out of, it says SKIP there because this is something that the Early Childhood Readiness Team has been working on, and SKIP endorsed these two areas in their plan.
I'm going to have further understanding of why we're funding play groups for parents. I don't get that. I mean,
Okay, so Ms. Schultz, is that, I hear that as
yes,
a budget
I'd
question.
like more
Thank you.
information on that as a budget follow-up question. And then also, my last question is on textbooks. This is I don't understand where the money's going. I don't understand the direction of the board in the past. Virtually every high school student I come across says either they don't use textbooks at all, zero, or that if there is a textbook, that it's only allowed to be at school, and that if they ask for one at home, they're not allowed to have one. And I don't understand who's buying textbooks. I don't understand what classes are being used, what courses are using textbooks. You know, the textbook reserve, you know, where that comes in. Can you just tell me a little bit about what's going on with textbooks and what the philosophy is that's being communicated? Because I feel like we say it every year here, and it's like the tin can game. By the time it makes it to the schools, it's a completely different story.
So briefly, I would say we try to replenish our instructional materials, of which textbooks are one example, to be on pace with when the state standards change and when the standards of learning assessments at the state change. So we just completed this year a math textbook adoption, and next year we have language arts adoption, which is currently in place, and the board has appointed members to serve on that committee as part of the community membership on the Language Arts Textbook Adoption Committee. And the state testing standards for the language arts SOLs will change next year as well. So we always want to make sure that we've got updated materials so that we're preparing our teachers to be able to prepare our students for success on those new standards changes.
But are you saying these are actual textbooks, or is this software licenses? Is this
These are actual textbooks, and again, depending on the content area, we rely more on a textbook resource, and we call them basal instructional resources. So typically it can be something outside of just textbooks, but here we're talking about textbooks. And you might recall in the math adoption, that we had done a number of years ago. There was a need, and there is a need for many members in our community to have hardback resources. So it's really a mixture of resources, basal instructional resources that we try to bring to bear. But here we're talking about actual textbooks. So like in the language arts adoption, oh, I'm sorry, I saw Mr. Smith, I apologize. In the language arts adoption, for example, you might be thinking of things like at the secondary level of class sets of novels, not necessarily an anthology. So it's a pretty wide range of basal instructional materials.
I'm gonna once again, look, 2 of us on this board have children left in the school system. I'm the only one that has 2. I'm the only one that has an elementary age student. I am asked to buy novels. I'm asked to buy the reading materials for my high school student. So those are not coming from the school. I haven't seen a textbook.
If I could just on that point,
Yeah.
because you're right, we haven't done a language arts textbook adoption for almost 20 years in FCPS.
But what I'm saying is, I don't know I don't understand where this money's going. I'm not seeing it on the ground. When I talk to students, when I talk at the school level, kids aren't getting textbooks at the elementary. I don't talk to as many middle schoolers. I see elementary and I see high schoolers. I don't understand where this money is going. And even when they do ask for it, they are told no. So there's a disconnect between what we're spending money on, or what it appears we're spending money on in the budget, what we're placeholding money on, and whether it's actually translating to it's happening in the schools. And so I don't know how this translates into a budget question, but we have to understand this, because we're the ones who set the policy, and we say, look, if a student asks for textbook, they get it, and it doesn't happen. So then I get suspect that we even need to put any money into, hard copy textbooks, because if they're not using materials that cost money, if it's teacher sourced, professional development, if they're co-collaborating on the curriculum resources and not actually acquiring textbooks, there's something that's at a disconnect between the budget and what's happening on the ground.
We'll provide greater detail for that 600,000 in a future BB.
Well, 2.82 million in the textbook reserve.
Right, in the reserve, yes. And I thought you were back up at the 600,000 line, but
Well,
yes.
no, I'm at
The whole
3.5.
2.8, I see.
It's like 3.5 million.
We can provide it. Alice, would you like to?
Just briefly, we'll provide the detail and a response, but just briefly, the changes between those two. So when we established the textbook reserve back in 2012, we were taking portions of the school's textbook per pupil set aside to fund the reserve, so that it was a sinking fund. We only did that for content areas in math and social studies. So the funding that's sitting in the textbook reserve now, which is just the balance of the 2.8, is the additional money that's gonna be deposited into the sinking fund, because when we get to that 6-year replacement for social studies and then math, we're gonna need to draw down from that money in order to do those.
I know, but see, this is the point that I'm trying to make, is we're talking about taking money at the per pupil amount from the administrators. At the same time, many of us are hearing that curriculum choices have waned, particularly in foreign language. And so there's fewer curriculum choices. They're not getting books, and yet we're still pulling back the per pupil to fund a future textbook buy, when none of the students that I talk to have a textbook. So this is the disconnect.
I hear you, and we'll get you the information. And I will say, I think we can talk more clearly with the principals so that they understand. And we need to listen to principals to understand what's going on at the classroom level with the basal instructional resources.
Okay, just to summarize, since we're short on time, we'll get much more information on the line item in this particular proposal, and it appears like Mrs. Schultz is looking for, I guess from Dr. Presidio, sort of where we are with textbook adoption and funding. Okay, we would love to end by 1:15, which would mean everybody needs to be succinct. Ms. McLaughlin.
So I've been trying to take notes as my colleagues have asked questions, and so I'll just try to maybe speak mostly to that. I do share Ms. Hines' focus on the class size issue. I think we can't continue to go forward on our budget and not repair some of the deep damage that's going on elementary through high school. I think our teachers, while they very much appreciate our desire to get our salaries up to the market, if we burn them out, they're not going to be in the profession and certainly not in our classrooms. So I think that's a very serious area that we've got to focus on with intentionality. In terms of Ms. Schultz bringing up the issue about ACE, I would like to see more details about this increased cost. It is concerning to me simply in the sense of I sometimes will get ACE mailings to my home, and I look at the cost of these mailers. I mean, my sons and my family, we don't take advantage of it, and I'm trying to figure out how we, by being an FCPS family, I guess we just receive it. But in this day and age, those kinds of catalog mailers, they come at a cost. Just produce them and to mail them. So I think we should be looking at that. Ms. Schultz, I think you brought up something that's really important for us to be thinking about, and I'm going to set the adult ESOL instruction aside. I want to get more information about what does the federal government bring to the funding on that. I do think that to date, the county government, which funds us at almost over 75% of our operating funds, those are county dollars. So whether we turn around and say to them, well, we're K-12, so adult ed is your problem, I don't necessarily think that's just kind of shuffling money back and forth within the same family. So under the One Fairfax model, we know that adult ESOL instruction is helpful in our community. It's helpful to our families. So I don't want to be backing away from Fairfax County as an entity delivering adult ESOL. How it gets done in the most effective way, if we're the vehicle for it, I'm supportive of it. Where I think I want to echo what Ms. Schultz is saying is take the adult ESOL responsibility and commitment to the side and focus instead on the other niceties of ACE. I will say, no, we are not the Northern Virginia Community College, and we're not Parks and Rec. And that I don't think is our mission, to have these fun, interesting, adult courses. So that's the part, Dr. Brabrand, that I think we've got to get more clarity, whether it's in a Brabrand briefing, beyond just a budget question, is an understanding of this $740,000, which is definitely heading in the wrong direction. What's adult ESOL, and what's the fact that we just, even though we have a 60% increase in demand and interest in ACE, is that all adult ESOL, or is it something else? Because outside of adult ESOL, I think we have to consider where our commitment is. Certainly, early childhood education is where we need to be focusing our instructional supports. And then I do want to say that the online campus, number 49, the $600,000, I will, as a budget question, want more details on that. I think I shared at a previous work session that other jurisdictions that surround us charge half the amount of money, around $400 a class, and we're charging $800, is what I understand. So I'm not pleased when I talk to Fairfax County students and their families about what it's costing them to take an online class to enable them to free up their ability to have these essential electives that create the portrait of a graduate. So I feel like that's an area that I want to understand more. Item number 46, I don't know if this is just a budget question or if staff want to direct me where to find it, but that's on the learning management system at $1 million for Blackboard. I just, to me again, looking at that number just it's a high number. And so understanding.
Would take that as a budget question?
This is a request for proposal that's on the streets right now to replace our learning management system. Our current learning management system is Blackboard. This is our best guess when we go to replace something that's been in existence for 20 years, that whatever we replace it with will have some increase in cost due to the conversion and to replace it with a new system. So this is in a sense, a placeholder, but we've gone out for RFP. It's been part of our contract renewals. And so this is an estimated when we do replace that contract, which is coming up the contract is expiring. And
Right,
so
we've
when we
had this in
replace
a
it-
very brief briefing, but I think
Yes.
if we could have it in a budget question as well, that
Yeah.
would be great, okay.
And then in terms of the textbooks reserve, I just want to echo Ms. Schultz's concern on that. I'm still hearing from families, especially when it comes to math, their children aren't having access to the hard copy math textbooks. Math is a subject area that is a lot harder to learn and study from online than it is through a hard copy book. So I do think that getting more information on that is going to be extremely important. And that's kind of my high-level concerns right
Okay,
now.
great. Thank you. We have Ms. Evans, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. Polchak, and then a quick Ms. Hines go back. Ms. Evans?
Thank you. I want to say, first of all, just I appreciate the changes on making sure that we can see where the needs-based staffing is, because that's important for us to preserve the needs-based staffing, and in order to be sure we're preserving it at all of our high-needs schools, we do need to be able to see it. So thank you for that change. My question on the academy has been answered, and then the only other one I had was on the AVID, the expansion of AVID, and let's see, where is it? And I realize that the 87,000 isn't the biggest number here, but what's your plan for the 3-year phase-in? It says two secondary, 1 elementary. Have those been identified?
So the secondary sites, probably we would prefer to put those in Herndon Middle and Herndon High School. Just in terms of the student demographics and the student need there, we think that that program would be best suited to Herndon. And then on the elementary side, we would look at one of our Title I schools to begin expansion in elementary programs.
And again, Dr. Presidio, if you could put that, we could repeat that in a budget question. Good, with more detail. Ms. Evans?
So right now, how many schools do we have AVID in currently? If you don't have that right now, let's make that.
Yeah, I can put that in the
I would
budget
like
question.
to see where AVID is at all levels. So if we could just make that a budget question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Evans. It was quick. Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
Okay, I'll try to go quickly. A lot of my comments have been addressed. I was concerned about the expansion, where the 14 positions would be for the academy. I think you said there were 14 people, or 14 positions where we were looking to expand. Was it 5? 5. Over 3 years, okay. In either case, I'd like to know where we're looking to do that.
And again, that needs to come in a formal budget question answer.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Also, with respect to the textbooks, I just want to echo those comments. I've been hearing the same thing. I know when my youngest graduated, I didn't see any textbooks. So my concern is, yes, also where is the money going? But, you know, I think the explanation will be sufficient. I'll just leave that as it is. There's a category in here with respect to demographic adjustments. If we could just get clarification on what that might be, or.
Do you know what line that is? Line
Yeah,
15?
that's just, that just represents projected enrollment and then projected enrollment for other groups like ESOL, special education, free and reduced lunch. Some of our staffing is based on those counts of those 3 groups, and that's all that means by demographic adjustments.
Okay, well, I would be specific, especially interested in what the changes would be for ESOL and special ed.
And by the December 10th work session, we will get the updated enrollment numbers broken out by various categories that impact the budget, yes?
Yes, I believe that's scheduled for December 10th.
Great.
Mr.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Polchak?
I wasn't.
I'm sorry, you weren't done yet.
Oh,
Okay,
I'm
go
almost
ahead.
done. But for the academy too, I just wanted to ask a question, Dr. Brabrand. Had we considered using technology to try to make some of these things available where we're unable to take the whole show on,
Yeah, we do. And I think there's a real opportunity with FCPS ongoing to high school to begin to rethink how we're going to have technology in every kid's hand, how we can take some of our programs and maybe solve some transportation challenges that we haven't before. So that's frankly one thing I've asked Mary Beth and Sloan to look at. The board's just supported moving forward with that in the budget, and I think it's time to start to re-envision how do we do some of our existing programs that are high quality. Nevertheless, we're still going to need staffing. Even if I'm approaching it online, we're going to need the staff to be able to do those health courses, however it's accessed, whether it's online or a physical presence. But I don't disagree, and we can certainly work to address that.
And then lastly, just with respect to ACE, I think it would be helpful to see how that is being handled by some of the similarly situated areas around here. I agree with my colleagues. It is an issue of priorities. I certainly would have a higher priority on early childhood education. But, and I'm also wondering if this is something that should have, and I'm sorry, I don't recall whether this was in our legislative priorities or not. But the state should certainly know that these problems are existing. There is a public need. I'm not sure that the schools should have to carry that burden, though.
Can I suggest in the budget question dealing with ACE that we also go back, because there is a historical legislative requirement for these kinds of instructional programs. Back in 1957, it was sent to K-12 education systems to provide them, but I don't know where it is now, because there is a state requirement for many of these programs, and exactly who has to do it.
Is that an unfunded state requirement?
Probably. But at any rate, there people want more information. Okay, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, was that it? Great. Thank you. Ms. Palchak.
Yes, thank you. I also try to be brief. Following up on the ACE conversation, I think we've been having this and should continue to. I know we had the information at some point, but if staff could give us again information on which programs actually are also K-12 or pre-K-12 student programs like driver's ed, behind the wheel, and others that are not, versus adult beyond 22 programs. So that would be helpful, because I know we provide some very important education for our county students and their parents and families. So I want that to be included in any conversation around ACE. But I do think we need to have that conversation with the county and our nonprofit partners. A quick question. I know we mentioned this quickly. The VPI, I think it's a little bit confusing on there. So it says that the VPI grant was reduced, but then A, if you could explain how it was reduced and what that means, and B, when it says that 600,000 online campus was moved, if we add those to the 650,000, it comes very close to the 1.25 million. So the 600K being moved out, and then so did the VPI grant reduction get included before this? I guess I'm a little confused of what was reduced in the VPI grant.
I'll attempt to address the VPI part and then the chart. Okay, so the VPI plus piece was in the first column of 1.3 million. So what it was we had received a federal award, I want to say at least 3 years ago, but don't quote me on that, 3 years ago, where we expanded some of our VPI classrooms. Part of that agreement, which it came through the state, said that once this award goes away, you have to sustain those classrooms. So grant money goes away, but you have to commit to keeping those. So this is the funding that we need to keep those classrooms going. The other $600,000.
So Alice, the nugget there is that was in the original 1.25. You were already accounting for the grant reduced. That's not new information.
So the
those
650
notes
includes the VPI we're now taking on. Is that correct?
The 650 is the VPI.
Is the VPI?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so maybe just how
And
that.
could we clarify that in the
clarify.
budget question as well?
Sure.
Thanks.
That would be
Okay.
helpful.
It looks like it was reduced by 600,000 in that, but
The 600,000.
No.
the-
Okay,
the-
so And can we clarify that's not new seats, that is our maintenance of effort of a prior federal?
Yes, and we'll answer that
grants.
in a budget question to clarify that, okay?
Yes, we'll do that, but
Thank
it is to sustain the current
The
seats that
current
we serve.
seats, just
now.
not an addition of seats. That's
Correct.
helpful. Thank you. A couple other quick questions. I'm very pleased to see a couple of things here that I know Dr. Nixon and I heard from the SSECAC, or support employee groups. So one of them, on here, we are protecting the MSA for non-teacher positions, or at least there's a placeholder on there. So I hope we can remain that, keep that on there. The other question would be for, so other salary increases. We do have the substitute rate, which we're still waiting on further information following our work session.
Yeah, so we have current placeholders here for BA lanes and for substitutes. So we've just gone with what was in the budget before, and then we're going to bring information back to the board to consider.
Okay, and then I know this is still very initial. We shared our priorities with the superintendent, apologies, and their staff. And I know I had asked questions about our IAs, their salaries and our salary scales. So is that something that you need guidance as like a general board for us to look at if we would like to look at non-teacher compensation?
Well, I think, again, at this point, it's budget questions.
Okay, so
Because
would-
that indicates also what you're interested in.
But meaning I need to ask a formal
Yes,
question?
yes. That gives us a better track record of where we are.
Okay. So in addition to having these conversations, all right, well, I guess I would like to ask the question on our IA compensation scales. If, as we do our cost of living analysis, I know several of us have heard and met with some of our IAs and looking at the full-time salary of an IA and the cost of living in our county. And I know in the past we've had some conversations about the use of IAs as we try to address things like class size and support for special education. So I don't know if that we decided was not a helpful or a useful strategy, but if we could revisit that, if we feel that that's something that that would be helpful, especially as we're created our special ed to, or IA to teacher cohort. I would like us to revisit that. And I can do a more clear question right now. It's just a very simple, broad question. And then finally, it's maybe not directly county funding, but as we're talking about our academy courses, I know in the past under Dr. Garza, there was the white paper around partnering with Inova for our Health Sciences Academy program. I know I've talked to Dr. Zulaga about the possibility, and Ms. Evans, of expanding our Health Science Academy, specifically, the Falls Church Academy is very close to Inova. They're now partnering with UVA, VCU, and others, and Alexandria City has created a similar program. So I guess this is maybe not the place, but since we're talking about health sciences, I'm happy to hear that's where that's the biggest need, is if we could start to look at possible partnerships, especially as Inova is expanding pretty massively down the street from here and creating housing and extra traffic in our neighborhood. So I would love for us to look at that. And sorry, I have one tiny little question. The free bus pass program.
Wait, back on that.
Yeah.
I would suggest it as a budget question, an
Okay.
update on the plans for the new Inova Center and our expansion of health academies, and just
Okay.
to see an update where all that is.
Ms. Palchik, I would invite you to come and see what we're doing at the West Potomac Governor's Health Sciences Academy. We do have a partnership with Inova Mount Vernon there, and do quite a bit of interesting programming, but also mentoring, job shadowing, and actually a job fair once a year.
Well, I would like to bring staff as well with me. I'm happy to visit it anytime, but I would, Dr. Zulaga and the Academy.
one more.
Thank you. And then finally, I know some of us went to the free bus program that I understand. I guess I would like to know who is funding this new Metro Bus Pass program? What is the plan for expanding it past the pilot initiative? Because I think we have many of our students beyond just Justice High School who would benefit from that, and I believe eventually the county in creating new transit bus riders. So if we could get an update on the current funding source for that, and if there is a beyond pilot expansion initiative, because I think that's an
Again,
important.
budget question.
Yes,
Thank you.
so
Okay, we have 30-second go-backs. Ms. Hines, Ms. Schultz, Ms. McLaughlin, and I will count.
Okay, so on textbooks, I also have been hearing from parents, particularly special education parents, that the unpredictability of whether or not there will be a paper textbook in addition to online textbooks creates a potential equity issue, not only for free and reduced meal families, but also for special education families. That kind of support at home is really important. So I was going to ask a question. I don't know if it fits in as a budget question, but if we could somehow survey and find out how many courses have no paper books at all, right? There's no paper textbook, there's no paper textbook backup for online, just any place where a paper textbook is not available, and what courses those are, so that at least we have the data to see where we might have holes that we can fill. Does that make sense?
Okay, I would see that as a next steps update for,
We're getting a funny look.
they have to
from over there.
figure out, yeah, to
What
get
is-
us back with
is
that,
that-
okay?
If I could, I'd like to maybe work with Ms. Hines on that to make sure that we're not asking too much inventory
Exactly.
keeping of our schools. But I think we can get a lot of that information.
Okay, yeah. I would see it as-
Let me make sure I've heard clearly today, there's a disconnect between textbook spending and what we're seeing in the classroom. We'll get to the bottom of it. We'll advise the board of what's really going on, and we'll come up with some
Okay.
proposed solutions. And part of it may be more information about what's really going on the ground, so we can bring that collective understanding to the board and to the community.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schultz, 30 seconds. I know. Was it
ACE
about-
offerings, baking and pastry arts, culinary arts, floral design, genealogy, needle arts, personal and creative interest, broadcast production, business finance, communications, entrepreneurship, small business, leadership, nonprofit, personal finance, certification prep, networking, graphics and design, all sorts of foreign languages, not English, building maintenance, carpentry. You can see what I'm saying. There's nothing here that is an imperative on an adult education, Fairfax County subsidized from the public school side that cannot be provided through Parks and Rec, through their offerings. This is outside the ESL, outside the driver's ed, outside the student-centered, that it is far, far, far expansive into what you would typically see from the Parks and Rec. And those are the classes that I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Schultz. Ms. McLaughlin, 30 seconds.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Burden, I know you might remember a meeting with 12 board members. It's tough to keep all of our inquiries straight, but we talked about the fact that item number 62, where it's the salary and the FTE increases, and it also is item number 33, MSA for non-teacher scales 1%. Referencing those two item numbers on here, this might be the budget follow-up question that I don't expect you to have to answer right now, especially in 30 seconds. But I am concerned that the county government, as I understand it, does a pure COLA. Like if they're not getting their promotional increase, at minimum they're going to get a cost of living increase. Is number 33, that 1%, considered a parallel to it or a comparability, that if you're not getting a step, you don't qualify for a step that year, you can count on getting at least a 1% increase? And I ask that because we've always said we don't want employees going from one year to the next when we know inflation and cost of other healthcare benefits and things, that they'd be making less money in the subsequent year than they did in the current year. So does this budget lay out that at minimum, like a county employee, every single one of our employees can count on their salary getting it versus a 1% bonus, because bonuses don't help toward retirement?
Yes and no. I mean, what you have to remember is that steps are movement on the scale, and MSA, MRA, COLA, whatever you want to call it, are applied to the scale. So yes, in general, that 1% represents all of the non-teacher scales going up by 1%.
So there are years that if you're not going to move on the step, you're in between steps, even though we increased by 1%, the step compensation by 1%, that market scale adjustment to that, we will have employees who don't get what many of us, because you said call it what you want, but a COLA is not an MSA, because a COLA means everybody gets it, correct?
Those have been used synonymously, is my understanding.
I understand. So maybe this is, and the reason why Ms. Strauss, I felt this was so important, because we're going into a joint meeting with the board of supervisors, and I want to make sure we're all talking apples to apples with each other. If county employees are getting, in its purest sense, a COLA, a cost of living adjustment, no matter whether you're in for your merit increase over year, then they're getting protected against any inflationary changes over the year prior or costs to their health benefits. But our employees don't have that same protective increase. And I want to make sure that's what we're advocating for, because I've always said if you work for the county or work for schools, you should be able to count on the same increase for parity's sake.
Okay, so in order to summarize, because we're trying to use the same vocabulary between the schools and the county, so can we have a side-by-side
Crosswalk, right.
crosswalk to make sure that we are understanding what is done on the county side and what is done on the school side? Does that make sense?
Yes, they refer to it as an MRA, a market rate adjustment. And typically their market rate adjustment is a little higher than what we've assumed for MSA, because our steps are slightly larger than the steps on the county side, so that we end up hopefully in about the same place.
So I just thank you, Ms. Strauss, but I want to make sure that in all of this crosswalk and the definitions and everything, I would like to have some certainty on, is the county doing anything that's related to COLAs that ensure every single employee there gets some sort of raise each year? And if yes, why did they do that and we don't? If they're not, it's just a matter of terminology. But to me, it's not just terminology definitions. I want to know, what are they proposing to do for every single one of their employees going into FY20 compared to what we would be proposing for every single one of our employees?
All right, we will attempt to answer that given the best information we have.
Right, they're very guarded about
Yes, I know.
what they reveal.
We can still go with the last 5 years, what they've done then.
Sure, okay. Thank you. All right, Mr. McElveen?
Just very briefly, I do know that at the middle school level in particular, they use the textbooks because my dad uses them in his class. And I would assume at the high school level and the less advanced classes that they would use the textbook when students aren't reading novel length, but we can hear back from staff on that.
Thank you, Mr. Moon.
Thank you. It's going to be really within 30 seconds. That as far as ACE is concerned, my colleagues know where I stand. I don't want to regurgitate all the debate we had on ACE from the last year, but I'm willing to do that in the future. With a request from Delia Parchik about instructional assistants, looking into a pay scale of instructional assistants, I want to join her in making the same request.
Okay, and Ms. Palchuk?
Yes, briefly, Ms. McLaughlin reminded me, I forgot my other question around the cost of living, and we had this conversation as well, can we formally, if we're not already, look at, I know we have a 1% placeholder for the bonus, but different structures, whether it's the cost of living, similarly to what the county does or not, but to look at perhaps smaller MSAs versus the 1% bonus, and moving forward, are there good ways to implement that for the FCPS side? I don't know if that made sense.
So you're saying an MSA instead of a bonus?
I know we've been having this conversation, but if we can, I want to formally ask that we look at MSA structures, perhaps not a 1%, but different ways to do an MSA versus the 1% bonus for the non-eligible, for eligible employees who aren't seeing an increase.
Right, but you know, that's a recurring cost that
Yes.
also has benefit ramifications, et cetera.
Yes, but if we could, I want to
Yeah,
formally ask
we can
for
cost
that
it.
full
Yeah.
study. Thank you.
Okay, let's take a look at next steps. However, I don't want to wordsmith what I really heard as mostly budget questions. I'm going to count on my colleagues to refine their budget questions, and I know staff has been taking careful notes. So, take a look at these and make sure that, and I'm going to just simply ask randomly if anybody has any wordsmithing questions on what has been referred to under their name.
Janie, I do.
Okay,
Just 'cause
yes.
I have the first one there. I think it's not so much how reserve positions will be reallocated. I think my question may be a little more general than that. Let's see if I can, I sent you a copy of it, Janie, and I know you've been a little busy the last few minutes, but this was my thought. That I would ask a budget question for further detail about the staffing standards placeholder. So provide further detail on staffing standards placeholder. You know,
As noted in the budget line.
oh, budget line 40, okay, thank you.
Yes, I think that that clarifies it.
I think that's fine,
Great.
yeah,
All right.
thank you. And
Thank
you
you.
can take the rest out. Not, take out how reserve positions will be reallocated. That's,
Well, I think we will try to broadly go through this, but I'm going to count on colleagues to formally submit budget questions, because everybody's been taking notes. Well, we'll put it here, but when you see the budget questions submitted, you know, you may
can I
want to
say,
wordsmith a little
I'm sorry,
differently.
can I say that I want this also to be a budget question right now?
Yes.
Would that be all
Yeah,
right?
we can.
Okay, rather than having to
Yes.
go the next step and ask
Yes,
you, because I
okay,
might
we'll do our
forget.
best, but I know people may think differently when they get there. Yes, Ms. Evans?
So I guess we all seem to be a little unclear. I had asked also for a listing of where Avid is. So I'd like to see that up there, and I
Okay,
think
we
that's-
add that?
Ms. Strauss, there's a number of different next steps or questions that people have posed throughout the past almost 2 hours. So if I can suggest that people, if you don't see your question up here, if you would type it out and just send it to the clerk and to, I guess, Ms. Burden, that would be the most effective way of getting all of them in. I'm a little concerned that we are now so far
I
behind
am too.
schedule, and if we try to get every one of these questions laid out here, we will be here until 9 o'clock tonight.
I agree, because there were a lot of budget questions.
I did
asked.
just that because we missed the academy position question I had, and then Ms. Keys-Gamarra, I think, echoed, so I did that.
Okay, so yes, because I also saw emails coming in. If we could basically leave this as is, and knowing that there will be more budget questions and clarifications coming in, the one question that was asked for further research,
Are you talking about number 5? I'm happy to take that out.
pardon?
Future use of text, we can take that out.
Okay,
That's not a next step.
all right, yes, because that is a significant, okay.
So
is
Ms.
it-
Strauss, just for process, what I'm going to do is like my number 5 isn't exactly what I was asking for, but I'll just send it to the clerk.
Can we do
But
that?
it kind of captures.
Yes, okay, and we'll kind of get together and make sure we've covered it. Is that
And
all right?
Madam Clerk, could you send this to us right now over the lunch break? We can,
No, and that's right. And that's fine. Yes, no, I assumed that was going to happen. My advocacy is that people take it upon themselves to make sure they've asked their budget questions.
And I will add, we have some guidance, and we've generally shared it with the board around budget questions and the prioritization of budget questions, and whether you'll need it for a decision or for more information as we think about prioritizing and getting that information to you. So we can provide that in the Brain briefing. We've normally done it in a budget presentation. We hadn't anticipated getting the number of budget questions for this work session, so we didn't provide it, but we will provide you that information. And in that, it explains the individuals to email the budget question to. We normally have the budget chair, the vice chair, Ms. Burden, myself, the superintendent, but we will get that information out in the brand briefing.
Okay, so we have agreement. Now we're going to officially move forward. We will reconvene at 2 o'clock, short lunch. Thank you.
Before you do that, I have some Thanksgiving cards for the wonderful staff and students at the Davis